This is a technique that I've seen at a lot of other conferences called lightning talks. And really the idea is that this would be a chance for not a full-blown presentation, but just maybe 5 minutes on a topic that might be of interest to people that involve Delta Heritage. So
I'm Jan Vick. Been living in Rio Vista for quite a few years now. I am a former mayor. I don't like to admit it, but I was. And I've continued to be involved with the Army Base project in Rio Vista. How many of you know that we have an Army base? 3! Wow! The Rio Vista Army Base was established right around 1910. And the reason for its establishment was the California Debris Commission and the Army Corps needed a place for their huge dredges to do flood control for the valley. This was the historical significance of the Army base. It grew up into a fairly substantial base eventually, and was very instrumental in getting the river dredged so you could have good passage between the Bay Area and Sacramento and further north to remove the debris, a lot of which came from the gold mining and up in the mountains, and to prevent flooding. So, as you know, that the system of levees, the bypasses and all of that, the weirs, were all part of the flood project. So that was the first major thing that occurred, and the CDC, or the Corps of Engineers, really, they were looking for a place that was central where they could do it, because the bottleneck, what they called the cork in the river, was downstream from Rio Vista. Now you see this beautiful river going through with Decker Island on the left as you're going downstream. Well, that used to be all an island. So they cut through that and created Decker Island, and they also took out Woods Island, which was right in the river by Rio Vista. And nobody knows that now, but that's what happened. There's a short history over there. There's probably only 1 or 2 of these left. So they started with building storehouses, warehouses, repair facilities, barracks, and marine ways. We have a big marine railway now that is basically non-functional. It started out with a small one and then went to a big one. This was the most important part, or the time frame, for this base. In 1942, during the war, the Army shifted all of its construction projects to the Army Corps of Engineers. By 1944, there had been a huge expansion in the Army base. It was originally 60 acres, and in 1963, 4 acres of the 60 acres was transferred to the Coast Guard for the Coast Guard Station Rio Vista, which is still there and has jurisdiction of the waterways up as far north as you can get. And it's a huge area that our station has to cover. Ultimately, there was no need. They did ship repair, they did all kinds of things there. There were about 27 buildings originally on this site. At the time of the first BRAC, the Army said, we don't need this anymore. They negotiated with the city. The city ultimately bought the property, which at that point what they bought was 28 acres. And so it kind of sat there, and all these buildings started to deteriorate. And then the Department of Water Resources came and they said, we want to take all the research that was done in the Delta by the feds and the state to bring it to one place. They chose Rio Vista as being most central. Since about 2003, we have been working with the state on developing the Rio Vista Estuarine Station, Research Station, which we call Rivers, to bring together all of this research. So that's going to use all but about 10 acres, and that leaves 10 acres for the city, and this is where the committee gets involved. When I was mayor, this whole project with DWR was not moving, and so I established this committee to work with the city, with Garmendi's office. Anyway, the exciting piece of it is we have the riverfront, and it's an absolutely gorgeous piece of land. It's got derelict buildings on it. We want to build an interpretive center that will give the history of why the base was established and the importance to Northern California, particularly in preventing floods. Working with the Fish Center and the Research Center are to do community education.
It's great to be here, part of the second year of the Delta Forum. It's particularly cool to know that we're now the National Heritage Area. It's great. In designating the Delta National Heritage Area, Congress realized what we've already known for years, and that is we have all this great history and heritage. The purpose of our nonprofit is to, what I would be quick to say, there's much more heritage and history in the Delta. Not just Clarksburg, but that's where we live, and we've chosen to do that. It's been a long-standing dream of ours to restore the schoolhouse, and we started doing this 4 years ago when we found out that the property that the structure was sitting on was about to be sold. So we formed hastily our nonprofit organization out of the desire to utilize this 136-year-old schoolhouse as a repository to tell our history and stories that abound in Clarksburg. This approach seems to be our calling, but it might be taken and implemented much differently in other communities in the Delta. And by the way, an example of our heritage in Clarksburg is that this year is 170th anniversary of the founding of Clarksburg. The earliest settlers in Clarksburg were the Plains Miwok Indians. They survived floods and all kinds of adversity, and eventually they succumbed to epidemics. The first Europeans that arrived in Clarksburg saw virtually a swamp that was from the Sacramento River almost to Dixon. So this idea of reclaiming this land was one of the largest reclamation projects in the history of the country. This group of early farmers, with the determination and grit, they turned this reclaimed land into some of the richest farming land in the United States. Since we had a head start, I'd like to review with you today the lessons that we learned on this journey of ours, some good, some bad, and some still unfinished. First of all, the structure and the property. We have the title for the schoolhouse, and we just secured the rights to buy the property next to the community church. If you're familiar with Clarksburg, there's the post office, the community church, and a wonderful three-piece parcel of property under 100-year-old oak trees right at the corner. This is the property that we will put the schoolhouse on. You might ask me, well, why do you want to do this when it's an absolute impossibility to build anything in this flood area? We took it on anyway, and our advantage was that we were going to put the schoolhouse on 8-foot stilts anyway. That's where it was originally. So that took a lot of the issues away from those that were concerned about floods. We also are working with the Yolo County Planning Department to get approval to do this. We went to Supervisor Oscar Villegas to help us with the Planning Department. He set up the meeting. He was there for the first 2 meetings. And I must tell you, it's been a great ride with the planning community. Steve works on that extensively. What's important is when you develop a relationship, go high, because all the person can do at the top can refer you to the right person in the middle or the bottom, but start high. The construction, we have retained Rand Haight as the architect and Craig Russell as the general contractor. These two collaborated on the building of and the remodeling of the Clarksburg Church a few years ago. We did this to create and build community confidence in the fact that we want to do this correctly. We have quite a few artisans in Clarksburg that would like to volunteer their time. In fact, it would be great if we could use artisans and completely do the project, but I don't know how you handle a bunch of volunteers. Oral history. A primary method that we're going to use to tell our story is oral histories of our families. There's an urgency to this because our old folks, we're losing our old folks. So we started a couple of years ago with our first experiment with Graham Connor, a longtime resident. He had completely finished, he has completely finished Ancestry.com and real knowledge of his family and deep knowledge of history. So it'd be a great first story. So we arrived at his house with our four of us with our tape recorders, all ready to take and absorb and record his thoughts and memories about his family's life. Well, we left on a high. We had a set of supporting documents. We got back and we started the tapes, and I'm telling you, we couldn't make heads or tails out of the tapes. Number one, I've never heard so many ums and ahs in a tape recording, so many periods where there was nothing said, to other periods where we found it hard to identify, well, who said that? Who asked that question? So the point is that we failed in this, and it really says if you want to do oral histories, you got to take a professional approach. You either have to have a professional do it, or at least teach you how to do it.
Use video.
Interpretive planning, we've heard about that today, and it's vital. If you don't have an interesting project for visitors to come, you're a failure. There are several restored schoolhouses in Northern California that are virtually locked. Interim fundraising. We have 4 years of fundraising so far under our belt. We started year one with a dinner at the headquarters house where the original land was sold. Year two, we had a historic home tour. Year three, we mixed it up a little bit, and we went modern. We had a block party in one of the newest streets in Clarksburg. And last year, we had an old-fashioned 1920s picnic. We had 265 people attend the picnic. We tried to mirror it around the picnics that were held at the headquarters house when people came to buy the land. They always had a picnic, and so we tried to be as authentic to that as we could. But besides raising money, what we were able to accomplish here is bring the community together. And it was amazing to see how our community interacted with each other. Education. The schoolhouse was a block from the charter school, the intermediate school, and the high school. Therefore, it will be an extension of the school as it relates to the history and the heritage of the area. As a community resource, it will be available for meetings, events, and receptions. The business plan. As a new project, we are creating a business plan. And I think if you hope to raise significant amounts of money from well-heeled investors or companies, they're going to want to ask you for a business plan. The good thing about a business plan, other than preparing yourself for fundraising, is that it gives you the opportunity to do the critical thinking about your project. And that critical thinking might change the end result of what you want to do. So a business plan is very important. Ongoing sustainability. Some people say that once you do the fundraising and you get built whatever you want to build, then that's it. But it really isn't. You have to determine for the future what you're going to do to make enough money to maintain the building, pay the utilities, and pay personnel if you're going to have personnel. Finding these revenue streams is very difficult. You know, how are you going to generate this money on an ongoing basis? Most small museums find it almost impossible to generate the sufficient revenues by just being a venue. A venue even a place like this most likely will not pay for its ongoing costs. The areas that we're exploring to come to grips with this is, for example, wedding receptions. We are envisioning a huge deck off of one end of the schoolhouse under this canopy of old oak trees. This deck will be similar in size to the square footage of the schoolhouse. It will be large enough that we can have receptions and gatherings outdoors during the spring and summer months. We'd like to collaborate with the Clarksburg Community Church, who has almost given up having weddings because there's no place to have a reception. So now they get married to the church, walk across the street, and utilize this, what we hope will be a beautiful, oh, time's up. Okay, anyway.
Sorry.
So finally, one thing to be sure is that Clarksburg agritourism will continue to grow. As a wine destination, the area will continue to grow based primarily upon the pull of the old sugar mill. Clarksburg is 40 minutes away from 2 million people. If you can imagine, for Valentine's Day, there have been over 2,000 to 2,500 cars at the old sugar mill, when I've only been able to count 105 cars in the city of Clarksburg. So this will be a good tailwind as we go forward for us. We are truly the gateway to the Delta. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So I was going to do two different talks, and I'm going to say that crowdfunding is a handout that I've got over there that has everything you need to know about crowdfunding, so I'm going to suggest you read that. I'd like to talk about crowdsourcing instead. What crowdsourcing is working together to gather, transcribe, interpret, and share our work digitally. And the reason that I got interested in crowdsourcing, and there are people who are doing it, Bob Benedetti is doing it on the book that he's working on as well, is the frustration I would have when I would go to some place like SAMC, at then it was SAMC, the Center for Sacramento History, and know that they had 6 million photographs, but maybe I could only get access to 60,000 of them digitally. They had not had the time to be able to identify or to get those in some kind of way. And I was always running into that problem of trying to get material. I went to New York about and I've done crowdfunding. I went to New York about 5 or 6 years ago, and they had a class that I could take on crowdsourcing, where they would teach me how to be able to help them do their crowdsourcing for the library. It was a class for literally an hour and a half that I took at the end of it. And what crowdsourcing basically is that you get a team of people that do not have to even be in your own city. They can be in their own computer. And what they do is they can tag photos, images, identify buildings. They can take menus and transcribe them. And so I ended up taking the class, and I just wanted to tell you some of the projects that I worked on. The first one was to cross-reference U.S. Census data with old telephone books. The other one that I did was to locate historical landmarks that are long gone. I mentioned it before, so you could then see how the landscape has changed over time. The other was to connect personal narratives that they had collected, and then with someone on a GIS system, be able to get their stories written. I would be given a narrative. I'd have to write it in 2 minutes, basically, that story. An actor would perform it, and then someone would put it on a GIS system. We were all doing that locally. And then the other one that I love, and near and dear to my heart, was a menu project. They have over 50,000 menus from around the world. And what we would do is to actually transcribe those menus so that over decades, you could see what food was being served where and what time, were there regional differences between menus, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a process that I really love, and the reason I wanted to bring it up today is I'd like to see us take something out of this and actually figure if there are some common projects that we have that we could crowdsource together. And there's tons of projects that I can think of. I wanted to mention one that is happening right now. James Scott from the Sacramento room was smart, and he realized that they had over 500 oral histories that had never been transcribed. He went to students at Country Day School. 10 kids come at a time with their own computers and with headgear. small class on how to transcribe, and they've been transcribing those oral histories to get them out. So this is kind of a plea for being able to do that. And I'm going to ask a question of you guys now. How many of you used Wikipedia? How many of you have told a story on StoryCorps? For most of you. StoryCorps Commons, the National Archives Citizen Archivist Dashboard. I don't know if you've known it, but it has, again, millions of materials that you can go online from home and actually be able to supply the information that you need. I have one special request for myself, and that is that we did a project here in the Delta called We Are Where We Eat. Thank you so much. We've received over 10,000 recipe cards from people locally in the Delta that need to be transcribed. Those are the kinds of things that we could do. Another appeal is for you to actually get involved with some things, and that is, have you used the California Digital Newspaper Project? For most of you who use it, if you use it, it's very frustrating because they have put things in on OCR, but you still need to be able to correct it. They're looking for citizens to be able to go on and take a look and make those kinds of corrections. The other thing is, and I am going to say, because we have the resource center here, I'm going to be bringing it. My brother has 750,000 items in my living room, dining room, and kitchen right now that he has collected. I'm not being facetious, he's a clutterer. Among those are 4 boxes of Japanese people from the internment camps and after wedding photos of Japanese men that had obviously been in the internment camp and then were in military uniform. There are things like that I would love to be able to donate to places, but I don't want to donate that without being able to help identify some of the people that we're at. I think that if we could band together and figure out some mechanism, maybe through the Delta Protection Commission, how many hundreds of thousands of artifacts, photos, and other materials do all of us have in our collections, that if we could figure out a way of getting citizens, and what I like about this is citizen archivists. When I trained at New York, even though I'm a historian, I was just any Joe Blow, literally off the street that could do it. So I'd like to, I'm done, appeal for us, Delta Protection Commission, if you could figure out a way that we could somehow, these stories of the Delta, start some kind of a crowdsourcing program so that we can identify this stuff, I would feel happy. Thank you.
How many of you know what the Delta Conservancy is? Not the Delta Protection Commission. Okay, a few of you do. Not the Delta Stewardship Council. But how many of you are wondering why there are 3 agencies, state agencies, with Delta in their name? Yes, okay. That is because that's how important the Delta is to the state. That's the way I look at it. We all have separate, different missions, and although we do partner and we collaborate, the Delta Conservancy, in addition to being one of those 3 agencies, is also one of the 10 conservancies across the state of California. And we have a unique mission, which is to work collaboratively and in coordination with local communities to put forth efforts that protect, enhance, and restore, I'm trying to say it right, protect, enhance, and restore both the Delta economy and the Delta environment, including agriculture and working landscapes. So some of you may be familiar with the Conservancy's Prop 1 program, which for the past 4 years has provided funding for ecosystem restoration and water quality. Prop 68, which was passed last year, provides the Conservancy with $12 million to develop a program and manage the program to address that other part of our mission, to support the economic vitality of the Delta. The Conservancy's Prop 68 program will focus on providing grant funding for projects that fall into the area of community and economic enhancement that fit within our enabling legislation, of course, and are allowable within this bond. And this can include things like public access, parks, historic and cultural preservation, recreation, tourism, agriculture, and environmental education as far as it is allowed within bond law, which basically means that anything we fund has to be connected to a capital project. So in terms of environmental education, that probably wouldn't be curriculum, but the interpretive signs, maybe. That's not an exhaustive list, and those things are still being worked out as we develop the grant guidelines. And I'll talk a little bit more in a second about the timeline for that and what that means. But I can say that while we're still developing what the guidelines will actually look like, we're really excited about the opportunity to be able to work closely with project proponents and develop partnerships on some of these projects in the Delta. There are a few areas that Prop 68 calls out in particular. And first of all, let me tell you, the name of the prop of the bond that was passed last year is the California Drought, Parks, Water, Climate, Coastal Protection, and Outdoor Access for All Act of 2018. Clear as mud. Often called the Parks and Water Run. There are a few things that it calls out in particular. One of the things that I wanted to point out is that in particular it puts emphasis on projects that benefit disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged communities, which is defined in the bond language and of course we'll be clear about in our guidelines as well. And projects that bring together multiple partners and funders. So in keeping with the intent of the bond, the Conservancy's program will encourage projects that benefit these communities and form partnerships with other organizations and funders. Our projection is to have the program open by the end of this calendar year. To do this, we need to publish grant guidelines that are approved by our board. That means that in the fall, we will have a public comment period that's normal with most grant program or most state agencies, as well as some public workshops. In order to get to that point, we're developing draft guidelines, and what we're doing right now to develop those guidelines is community outreach. So we're coming out to groups like this and to other groups and meetings. We're not creating more meetings, we're coming to where the meetings are already happening to get input from you all on what projects or types of projects, potential projects you are interested in, to see how we can use your input to inform the draft guidelines and make it so that it actually works for the Delta communities. So my ask of you all is to tell me what groups and meetings, and obviously not right now, but after the meeting, what groups and meetings, or you can contact me at work, we could be coming out to share this information with. I appreciate if you give me that information, that you also give me contact information for how to possibly get on the agenda at those meetings. And then also to answer the first question, which is whatever potential projects you know of that you might be interested in seeing applying for this funding. That was it. I did it within 5 minutes.
Wow. Thank you.
I'm Sandra Kelly. I live in Antioch, where I am a compulsive community volunteer with a deep passion for the Delta. I have a particular relationship with the San Joaquin River, and I love old boats. So my presentation is going to be about Fulton Shipyard, which is a small shipyard that was working in Antioch for many, many years. It's now defunct. And just show you a few pictures. If you want to stretch, stand up, or if you need to sneak out the door, feel free. I'm the end. So Fulton Shipyard is in Antioch. The building's still there, but it's no longer a shipyard. It is, strangely enough, at the end of Fulton Shipyard Road, which is off Wilbur Avenue, very close to the Antioch Bridge. It's located between the wreck of the Solano, which it was at one time the world's largest train ferry, and the Antioch Dunes National Wildlife Refuge, which is home to 3 endangered species in the Delta, the prettiest of which is the Antioch Dunes evening primrose. The shipyard began in 1918 when it was called the Jarvis Brothers Shipyard. It was bought by the Fultons in 1924, and it was closed in 1999. The last thing built there was these giant cranes that are now in Concord in the military area. And I did have some pictures to show you of them being floated down the San Joaquin River, but my ex-husband lost them, so we'll blame him for that. This is what it looks like today. Today it's often called the old boat ramp because the Antioch Marina has a nice new boat ramp, but it costs $5 to launch there. If you take your boat down to the old boat ramp at Fulton Shipyard, you can take your life in your hands and launch it for free. So for the cheaper, older members of the Antioch community, this is still the place for them to launch their boats. And they built a lot of different stuff at Fulton Shipyard. They built transport ships, freighters, fishing boats, giant cranes, tugboats, minesweepers, and even a ferry that we're going to look at. And this is an example. I'm just going to show you a couple of pictures. There's lots, if you like to Google old boats in Fulton Shipyard, you can find lots of pictures. But most of them, the ships are out on the ocean. In this picture, this tugboat is actually on the San Joaquin River. They built rescue tugs. What a job. If your giant ship is bombed, the rescue tugs will go in and hopefully save your boat and your life. I like this one because not only can you see the river at Antioch, but you can see that crazy camouflage pattern that was really popular in 1944. It's kind of the great-grandchild of the British razzle-dazzle camouflage. If you've never looked up razzle-dazzle camouflage, check it out. It's the most amazingly weird idea in camouflage. It's like if you make it look like Carol's shirt, nobody will see you. So you might want to look that one up. This is the launch of the USS Constant, which was a minesweeper that was built at Fulton Shipyards and launched on Valentine's Day in 1953. You can see how big those things were by the little people. Now, this leads me to the second part, which is my deep love for old boats. This is my boat. Her name is Land Ho. This picture was taken at her 40th birthday last year when we did have a party for her. And I started thinking, I wonder if any of those old boats from Fulton Shipyard are still around. Fortuitously, at least 4 of them are. The first one is the freighter Sutter. This boat used to lug stuff back and forth between San Francisco and the Delta. It was built in 1924. The picture on the left is what the Sutter looked like in 1931. If you flip bow to stern, you can see what it looks like now. It's the San Joaquin Yacht Club on Bethel Island. USS Observer was a minesweeper that was built at Fulton Shipyard in World War II. And if you have about $5,500 and you'd like to spend a week in Glacier Bay in Alaska, you can go and cruise on the Observer. It's now called the Seawolf. Anybody ever gone on the J-Mac ferry? Yeah, it's also sometimes called the Howard Landing Ferry, the Steamboat Slough Ferry, or that cable ferry. That was also built at Fulton Shipyard in 1969. And the last one I found was the tug Kitsap, which was built in 1992. They rebuilt it in 2012 and renamed it the Cilia. I don't think we have internet here for me to share a little video of the Cilia. But rest assured, it is the loudest boat in the Delta. It has a locomotive horn. So if you care to Google Cilia going under the Rio Vista Bridge, there's a great video of the bridge pulling up, the Cilia pulling through, and blowing that locomotive horn. So on that note, I was hoping to blow it to wake you up, but I don't think we have that time. Under 5 minutes, I'm done. Thank you all for your patience.